Welcome to Digitized Spotlight, your lens into the best builders in consumer crypto. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Winnie. On this series, we explore some of the latest trends emerging in consumer crypto and chat with those building at the forefront. On this episode, we dig into one of crypto's core use cases, stablecoins.
We chat with Ryne, co-founder and CEO of Eco, a stablecoin liquidity layer for on-chain apps and protocols. With Eco, apps can easily accept anyone's preferred stablecoin, regardless of the network, unlocking stablecoin liquidity from any connected chain and giving users the simplest on-chain experience. So great to have you on this episode of Digitized Spotlight. Today, stablecoins are a 227 billion market with 159 million holders, 25 million monthly active users. And this has kind of all come up in the past few years. And given you founded Eco back in 2018, you witnessed firsthand this massive growth. So really excited to have you on and learn more about Eco, how you've evolved over the years, and the state of the stablecoin market.
Love
So
it.
to kick things off, as we mentioned, Eco was founded when the stablecoin market was just getting started. Would love to learn more about your journey, and how the product offering has evolved aligned with the broader market since then.
Yeah, for sure. So, um, when we first started, we were still like very much had to try to convince people that stablecoins were going to be a thing, right? It was still kind of like the early days, and there was like this family tree of stablecoin projects. This was, you know, DAI was the best game in town at that point in time, and it was still pretty small. There was no USDC yet, and a lot of those projects were trying to do something like the algo stable space or the synthetic stable space, like payment currencies, basically. And I think that those were all like really good experiments, but it was all a little bit too soon, basically. We were looking at Bitcoin, and we're like, no one's using Bitcoin to pay. Some concept of a stable coin is needed, but we're all Ethereum pilled. And so we're like, it needs to be like maximum programmable. And people tried different angles on that. I'm kind of nostalgic for that season, to be honest, but most of those projects were still a little bit too soon. And even if the stable worked, they were all on mainnet. And so the UX for actually transacting with it was still not great, right? It was slow and expensive. And so that was sort of like, but that was our roots. We had this just conviction that stable coins were going to move a bunch of money. They're going to like dollarized crypto is going to bring a bunch of use cases on chain and a bunch of people on chain. And then they could do different things from there. And I actually think that that thesis is good. I just think it took some time to play out. And I think we're seeing it play out now. And so in the earliest days, we were one of those projects, kind of like payment currency, alternative, kind of stablecoin model. What would that look like? How would you build tooling for people to transact with it? How would you build tooling for businesses to accept it? We worked on that for a couple of years. We kind of raised our seed funding on that basis. And we built some really good tech, but we got to the end of it and we kind of realized what I said before and what everyone else was realizing, which is that um, even if it's like good tooling and it works, mainnet based transactions just like don't feel great. They're not quite there yet. Um, and what was interesting about that is that was like Eco season one. That was like the first earliest season of the company. And where most people may have heard about us before was like really season two. And that's when we built this consumer app designed around USDC. We started building that in 2020. USDC had come to be by that point in time, and we were looking at the crypto wallet landscape, and we were recognizing that the wallets were not kind of evolving into mainstream oriented user experiences. And so our stablecoin thesis was still there and still kind of the driving factor, but we were just like, all right, let's get out of the kind of like alternative stable currency development for now. Let's get out of sort of this online tooling development for now. Let's actually build a consumer app that tries to incentivize people to hold their money in USDC instead of in their bank account and gives them benefits for doing so. We think we can actually construct a UX around that that's a viable bank replacement. And that proved to be true. We built an app that was pretty successful for a while until it ran into a lot of the crypto banking difficulties that I think that most of us are familiar with by this point in time. But that was kind of a really powerful stretch for us because I think that we built a sort of a fast growth product. It was our first taste of product market fit. And it really, I think, validated our stablecoin thesis. it just became a really difficult product to build for different reasons that we didn't expect
Yeah,
when we first decided to build it. Yeah,
a lot has definitely changed in the last few years with the
yeah.
market regime, that which we'll get to. I guess like what are some, it sounds like your overall thesis has remained the same, but then you may have some new hypotheses for how that's gonna, you know, come to be. What are some like new hypotheses you have in this new era of the market and where stablecoins are today as you think about this next chapter for the business?
There's one really important one, and that's probably the only one I'll focus on. Uh, sort of, it is that basically stablecoins are like a key part of the interop solution, right? The interop problem of this multi-chain environment, fragmenting liquidity and fragmenting user experience, right? Is sort of we were always going to end up here. I think this is just a life cycle of crypto development. It's part of the result of the Ethereum scaling roadmap in particular. So I'm not surprised that we're dealing with a lot of the kind of the problems underlying the need for interop solutions as we talk about them. And a lot of the tech necessary to solve for interop is like necessary and fancy and hard tech. But I think also stablecoins are going to play a really important role in that landscape and in that solution space. I think we're getting close to a point where like holding a stablecoin should be sufficient to do most things on chain and cross chain, and that we can sort of design that user experience end to end pretty effectively and make it way simpler than it is today. And so I think maybe the most important hypothesis we have over the last year or so extends kind of our stablecoin maximalism, but it actually says that this asset class is really important to solving for interop cross chain, not just the underlying kind of infra necessary for solving for interop. And so that informs a lot of the way kind of we design our own protocol and our own platform.
Yeah, I almost think Eco's North Star is kind of creating what you guys call the most simplistic stablecoin user experience. And your tagline is what? One click full sign, which I love. Let's kind
Yeah,
of get into the more detail around that. I think you guys have two developer products from what I can read. It's like routes and accounts, which make it basically easier for developers to access the stablecoin liquidity in one integration.
yeah.
Maybe share exactly how this works. How can developers use it and kind of build on top of it, and exactly like what can they solve with kind of this API?
Yeah, for sure. Let me back into that from kind of like what is the end game, right? Why do routes and accounts exist in the first place, right? The end game is to basically make Eco a marketplace for stablecoin liquidity, right? So we look at the current market structure, and there's a lot of redundant stablecoin pools split across chains that don't network and talk to each other. I don't think you wouldn't design this system if we can aggregate a lot of that stablecoin liquidity into a more unified layer and serve it where there's demand dynamically in the cross-chain environment, we probably squeeze a pretty powerful solution out of all this and just like make crypto more capital efficient, honestly, and make stablecoins more scalable. That's what we're ultimately trying to construct. Okay, to get there, and then obviously we want to standardize the user experience for traversing that liquidity layer. To get there, the kind of like first order problem is to network a bunch of dollars in chain ecosystems, right? And so that's why routes and accounts exist. It's kind of like a logical progression, really. Like, okay, you want to unify a bunch of liquidity, you need to connect like a bunch of ecosystems that don't talk to each other yet. That's routes. Okay, routes are intent-based stablecoin liquidity bridges, and they connect chain ecosystems, and they're the fastest, cheapest way to send a stable, especially at some size, cross-chain. And counts are then sort of an account layer, an app layer SDK to call to our routes and compose arbitrary actions into that one-click stable send experience. And I oftentimes analogize accounts to the chip on your Visa card. Okay, accounts are not a wallet. It's not some new user-facing thing that a user has to download or go through. It's the thing that you actually never think about that calls to the network in the standardized way, such that you have a consistent user experience across any app or protocol front end that happens to integrate Eco.
Yeah, that's helpful context. And I think you kind of talk a bit about like kind of how do you cold start this unified liquidity layer, which is often difficult. What type of volume are we talking about for if people were to kind of leverage this today?
What do you mean What volume in what respect?
Like how much can like how large is the liquidity layer today?
You can serve easily nine-figure volume week over week right now on relatively little liquidity. There's a couple kind of secrets to that. They're not really secrets, it's just super capital efficient in how it assigns liquidity and how it recycles that liquidity. And so one limitation on an intent-based mechanism, um, in an intent-based mechanism, the user basically says, I want this to happen over there with my money. And then some third party executes that, right, for a slight surcharge, a slight fee. Um, and then that means that then the executing third party needs to come sort of claim the funds from somewhere. And the scalability of an intent-based system and its liquidity is sort of largely determined by how quickly can those LPs recycle liquidity and claim their funds and solve the next order. And in our system, they can do it every couple minutes. So a little bit of liquidity can go a really, really long way. And so, if there's enough sort of LP capacity in this network in anywhere in like the low eight figures, which is where it is today in kind of its beta state, that easily solves sort of a factor of 20 to 50x on kind of like day over day, week over week volume, so long as it's efficiently allocated. So it's actually very like capacity efficient. And you can see how this can get quite huge if there's any depth at all within the network to support this cross-chain environment.
That's super helpful. And then from the developer standpoint, I know it's sort of early days, but do you have a sense of like who are the main developers using your solution and what are they using it for?
Right now, the RaaS platforms are the ones that are sort of the first integrators, and then their member chains. So this is a really opportunistic one because, you know, um, most of the time when you're rolling an app chain, whether it's an L2 or an L3, you got to bring your own liquidity or source it from somewhere, right? So people can get in and can do a thing, um, whatever your use case may be, right? And so that oftentimes has been a cold start problem for app chains in the past, but one example we have here is like with Caldera, for example, our routes are natively embedded in their solution so that any Caldera member chain can opt into sourcing liquidity through this construct. They don't have to bring their own necessarily, right? As long as they bring some order flow demand, liquidity will allocate in their direction and it can be available for them on day one. And so that's just like from an app chain's like focus on your use case. Don't hold up your launch and don't take longer because you have to integrate various bridge solutions or go rent liquidity from the marketplace, right? In some kind of like off-chain negotiation. No, none of that anymore. Just like build your use case. We can deliver the liquidity through this platform on day one where you need it. And that pattern maps to some of the other sort of RaaS providers that will light this up and come online over the course of the next month and 2 months as well. That's a really, really good starting point for routes. And it kind of like reinforces our thesis, right? Like everyone kind of needs stables. Most app chains need stables, or at least they will take stables and then swap the stables into the thing to do their use case. So that value prop generalizes pretty broadly across kind of the app chain ecosystem, and it's a really good distribution point for us. And then with respect to accounts, the first releases here is kind of an alpha leak, but not in terms of specific partners, but the first releases would be with a couple partners that are either embedded wallet products or smart contract wallet products that would sort of integrate this notion of a one-click stable send through Eco more natively in their own SDK.
Super helpful. And for people who are maybe not as familiar in the landscape, when you say RaaS provider, can you
Yeah.
what that is?
Roll up as a service, right? So, there's the app chain thesis is that a lot of different apps and protocols will have their own roll-ups to handle their transactions. There's actually a lot of infrastructure you need to stand up to build your own roll-up. And a few of these service providers have come and scaled up quite well over the course of the last couple of years to basically provide that infra. So again, the app chain builder can focus on building the app and making the app great and focus less on running the chain, so to speak. And there's a few of these kind of RaaS providers that sort of are exceptional and doing a great job. I think there's kind of like 4 or 5 in the market that are the usual suspects, and those are the ones that we're working with at first impression for routes.
Yeah, that's helpful. You mentioned in the past that the market right now is either ready or needs some sort of like a Netscape moment in crypto where people kind of an
Yeah.
average consumer really understands that experience and it's very accessible for them to leverage, and transact on crypto rails. What do you think is like necessary to get to that moment? What do you think is that moment? And like, how do you think about your role in kind of Eco's role and playing a role there?
Okay, the second part of that's way easier for me to answer. From the first part, I've been saying that for like 6 years. I wish I knew. I thought we were building it for a while. Maybe we almost were.
Yeah.
Um, Turns out banks and bank regulators didn't want that to be the Netscape moment quite yet. But the funny thing is, I think that the product we were building in the app days was pretty powerful, and now like 10 people are building some variant of that product. And if one of them like breaks through really well, it has an opportunity to kind of be that. Um, and show people that it can be easy to use crypto and you can get really good benefits as a result, right? That's what Netscape was. Is like it gave the internet a picture and a cursor, and 10-year-old me could then use it, right? And so I don't think it needs to necessarily be something super fancy. It may not be something expected, but it doesn't necessarily need to be something super fancy. It just needs to shorten the leap, the logic leap and the UX leap for the average person to get on chain and to realize it has some unique benefits for them. And that's why I think our app was pretty powerful for a bit. And that's why I'm optimistic that some variant of that product formula will ultimately come through in this cycle.
Do you think it should be more fun or more boring?
I want it to be fun, but I think it might be boring.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like a split where like in outside the US it's more boring, but in the US it's more fun because
Quite
sometimes
possibly.
with payments, a lot of the average US, because we have very strong, financial infrastructure here, and people are
Yeah.
able to send money through, fintech platforms very well, that use case is kind of lost upon a lot of American consumers. So it's almost like I'm wishing that's the case. Like we have something super fun that people kind of like have the aha moment. And then like
Yeah.
abroad, like if you're in anywhere in like emerging markets, like they kind of already had this moment with stable coins, you know?
Yeah, totally. I think that's probably a really good way to think about it. I think honestly, Base is kind of betting on this.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for them, but like Ryne has also picked up this Netscape moment lingo over the last couple of years. And then Base is like all in on like creators and social, right? And I think the strategy there is probably aligned with what you're saying. It's like, let's create this garden. And out of the garden, something like super fun and random and sticky will emerge, right? And it may not be our Coinbase super app, right? It might be something like Zora tokenizing everything
Yeah.
that ultimately takes off. And I think that they're trying to cultivate that. So
Agreed.
um, the cool thing is, I think even though I don't know what that's going to be, we we can still help make it possible because if we do a good job of building our platform, um, that just means that we're making stablecoins more accessible for app developers, which means that we're making stablecoins more accessible for end users. Right? It's just like simple as that. So if whatever that thing is, right, would scale better or would be easier to use by virtue of being stablecoin denominated, then we'll be there waiting for it to provide liquidity in the most performant way. And it's kind of a neat place to sit. So that's potentially our role in the equation.
And building on that, seeing like these extensive market maps now of the stablecoin stack, things like payment
Hmm.
rails, orchestration layers, APIs, liquidity
Yeah,
networks,
there's
as
so
you said,
much.
chains. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would love your take on kind of what is the stack that's forming and where eco fits within that.
Where we fit within that is kind of neutral, right? How do I frame it? At the end of the day, remember, we're just a liquidity layer, and that allows me to be relatively neutral vis-a-vis chain ecosystems and stablecoin assets, right? If there's demand and if there's order flow and there's demand for your stablecoin asset, and to be in your chain ecosystem, then we will support it, right? Because that just sort of fits into the liquidity equation that we're trying to solve. Um, and so it's a little bit distinctive in this space. It's not like infra per se, it's capital efficiency, right? It's interoperable stablecoin liquidity, maybe 4x for the cross-chain ecosystem to some extent, you might say. We do have a little more of a full stack perspective, though. I'm not a modularity maxi. I think that if you make things too modular, you run into too many fee taking layers and you run into some UX breaking points that you maybe didn't anticipate along the way. So the reason we're building this routes and accounts product is so that we can have a little bit more of a full stack stablecoin UX kind of optimized solution. We want to try to standardize and simplify the way that developers and end users are calling to this network to just improve the stablecoin user experience writ large. Even though we really just care about kind of the liquidity underneath at the end of the day and making sure that's fully allocated. So where we sit in the stack is, I think, just like at that liquidity settlement layer, and then working with partners to improve the UX layer, and increasingly like make UX for stablecoins more and more kind of like asset abstracted. But if I have three high integrity stablecoins in my pocket, I should just have a dollarized spending power if that's all I care about. Things like that. Um, I think there's a pretty distinctive space. It's funny when a lot of these aggregators like the Artemis of the world or whatever, when they're building their map, they get in touch with us and they're like, "Where are you in
Where
this?"
where do you fit in this little map that I in this little matrix I've created?
Totally. And I'm usually like, make us a category. We want
Yeah.
to be a stablecoin category unto ourselves. This is not a stable chain. This is not on-ramping, off-ramping infrastructure. This is like best stablecoin liquidity and capital efficiency merged with ideally the apps out there that are sort of exposing the best stablecoin UX. And we want to power that by making sure that every time they need to execute a transaction, they can execute it on the best terms, right? In the fastest and cheapest way possible. And that's usually it's just, I say we're the stable layer, and then sometimes they listen to me and they put us in our own kind of category, and then sometimes they put us in like a couple spots. Usually they end up in a couple spots at kind of like the settlement and liquidity layer, and then with this accounts construct, it kind of like the UX layer, depending on how they're categorizing it. But it's been amazing to see those maps go from like 20 projects to 250 projects over the course of the last year. They're getting a little bit more like mind melting. But if we do a good job and if we play our cards right, then I think that eco will kind of like categorically stand for something pretty neutral among those categories and a little bit different.
Yeah. I mean, I think a large part of that is just kind of taking a step back in the market and regulatory regime, right? I think a hot topic right now in the US since the election has been around the legislation around stablecoins. Would love to kind of get your thoughts on kind of like your thoughts on the implications of what that means for kind of stablecoins in the US and if that how that impacts how you guys are thinking about building.
Um, okay, somewhat. I feel like we're at risk of rushing into it. This is like a paradoxical point, right? Like because we went into like okay, new regime, maybe some more crypto permissiveness, right? Like LFG, you know.
Yeah.
But I think some of the kind of like early structural proposals we've heard coming out of the legislative discussion feel a bit abrupt
Hmm.
in terms of the way we're categorizing stables, the way we're distinguishing between stables, foreign and domestic, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm a little bit wary right now of the pace of things, even though everybody ironically like wants guidance.
Yeah.
Um, it has become maybe a little more politicized among some of the larger projects and usual suspects than I expected it to, and maybe that was just naive on that basis. Fortunately, though, it does not actually deeply impact the way that we're building our product. I think it impacts the way these stablecoins have to get distribution in the market and how much liquidity demand there is for them within US based protocols or beyond. And in terms of the way we serve liquidity and the way we organize it in a protocol on chain, doesn't really it doesn't really change much in the design. I think it changes quite a bit for app layer concerns about what stables they choose to support and whether there are any constraints getting their end users in and out of a particular stable, right? But as long as there's demand for anyone that can touch a decentralized protocol to get certain types of stables, we want to make sure there's capacity within our network to serve those. And so I haven't actually had to, up until this point, based on what I've seen and read, worry too much about like system design implications for the way that this kind of like legislative push is coming together. This is like a, you know, crypto person who's been waiting on this moment for a long time. I hope that we end up with something that's reasonable, not captured by the wrong forces, and not rushed too soon, in spite of waiting for all these years. I'm really surprised that I'm saying that. That's the way that I felt this spring.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then in addition to the like changing regulatory environment, I think like the acquisitions and exits that we're starting to see, such as Stripe's
Yeah.
1.1 billion acquisition of Bridge, are also, heating up the investor market.
Mhm.
Would love to get your sense on the significance of that acquisition, and where the overall stablecoin market is heading.
It's the most validating thing for stablecoins, I think, that has happened. Remember how I said earlier, I don't have to convince anybody stables are going to be a thing anymore? That's like part market growth, but it's part like due to proof points like that, right? Um, Really powerful signal, because I would say Stripe is kind of like false started on crypto a couple times as they've tried to work it into their suite and into their product strategy in recent years. And that signaled, okay, we're in, right? This is enough money being spent that we're like in. We're not going back. And so that's hugely validating, because that's a company that has an incredible level of trust with regard to their execution and where they sit in the marketplace. And so the significance of it was, I think, it just sort of like an incredibly validating moment. For us, it was particularly significant because before that acquisition, I was starting to explain this new eco protocol as like, if you know what Bridge does, it's kind of like Bridge for protocols on chain. Um, to some extent, right? There's nothing on ramp, off ramp here, but Bridge does stablecoin orchestration and relaying and aggregation, and that's still a super valuable, probably a more valuable prospect between chains and among protocols than it is kind of in the app world today, or in the payment space, the Web2 payment space today. And so that analogy was kind of like playing for us a little bit if people knew what Bridge did at a high level. And I think has been particularly validating for us, and like just the value of helping stables flow better and helping orchestrate them for products that are plugging in. And honestly, I think it's just sort of I think it's probably a
Very
harbinger of a
validating.
broader
Yeah.
trend. Super validating. I would not be surprised if you see a couple similar acquisitions even
Yeah.
more valuable than that one by parties who think that they're a step behind
Yeah.
um,
I could see
over the
that.
next year or so. Yeah.
Like different other fintech companies. I mean, it's all heating up. Um, there was, a report last month by Artemis that basically noted that there's over like 100 stablecoin projects that have about 10 million or more in supply. And the biggest growth in that is like fiat backed and crypto backed stablecoins. Would love your take on like, is there a level where there's too much? And what about this growing number of stablecoin launches? And is that, do we need that much? Like everyone wants to kind of have their own stable coin. Where do you think this market is heading? Should there be a cap? Should there be like a few dominant ones that kind of had that? Or are we kind of spreading our attention and liquidity across too many stables?
Yeah, it's like we're adding another row to the fragmentation matrix,
Exactly.
right? And so it actually kind of exacerbates the market disarray problem that we're trying to solve. It's like not only is there all this liquidity between USDC and USDT redundant all over the place, but now there's new stables rolling every week that have some measure of adoption.
Yeah.
And there's so many vectors, right? And so, yeah, it's a little bit nuts. Um, and the way I personally think about it is, let's solve for the 80%. Let's solve for the 12, 15 chain ecosystems that are driving 80 to 90% of the volume. Let's solve for the 5 to 10 stable assets that are driving 80 to 90% of the volume, and let's let the dust settle on some of the new entrants, right? I do think invariably we'll need to support far more stables than that. There's probably some line of social proof, market cap, volume, proven history, not breaking, right? That you need to graduate through for a protocol like ours to kind of canonize support for your stable coin. And so it'll surely be more than the five or six that account for almost all the order flow today. But I think that we can track that market like a little bit longer. I also think we're building quite an interesting platform because it allows a new entrant to come compete for liquidity, right? as they've scaled up a little bit. And that's a making distribution accordingly across the network, which is a value prop for a lot of these new entrants. But I do think it's like a little bit nuts, and it's just kind of proving the need for a stablecoin abstracted user experience, because an end user like cannot have to worry about what
Yeah,
fungible dollar they need to use over there. You know?
agreed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna get worse before it gets better. But that might actually be strategically good for kind of where we're trying to sit.
Okay, this has been awesome. To close it out, we'd like to do a few rapid fire questions. So my first one is hot take on the payment stablecoin market.
There are too many stables. There are too many stables. There's too much abstraction. Okay, my hot take is there's just too much abstraction, and the pendulum needs to swing back a little bit, right? Because you have too many like, or I should say things are too modular. You have too many layers. You parse out like the technical development of all these layers, and then eventually they got to come talk to each other again, right? And you all get in a room again, and you're like, oh, there's 9 of us that want to take fees, and we don't have like a standard API for talking to each other. Did we accidentally just build the same thing?
That's my big issue with the space is we're basically replicating all the, opacity of TradFi and all the fees, and we're just recreating it on chain because everyone needs to take something.
Yeah, it's easy to do because there's just like there's some sort of like human element in that. Like this is just the way we coordinate and build systems. Um, Hopefully we can just incentivize it better this time around once it's on chain. But my hot take would have been, I think there's the stablecoin fragmentation problem is going to get worse before it gets better, and you're already on top of that one.
Yep. And then the second one, so trend that will define the stablecoin market in the next year.
Um, okay, the first thing that came to mind is kind of a boring one, unfortunately, but like there's just so many enormous institutions that want to roll stables right now. Right, you're talking about like if they all fulfill their plans, hundreds of billions of dollars in liquidity influx to new stables. Um, and so then you're talking about $1 trillion markets and not hundreds of billions of dollar markets where stables currently are, which is great growth, but you're pouring fuel on the flame big time. I wish I had like a hotter one on that. This is a little bit boring, but it's just like, we're 1% of the addressable stablecoin market right now, in spite of all the growth we've seen.
And that builds actually into my third question, which is other than the obvious, what are types of companies that need to be built on stable rails that are not yet on it?
I on stable rails, I'm going to go back to something I said before, which is like a design thesis for us. I think most any on-chain product should denominate its UX in stables at this point in time. Native assets are not interoperable anymore. Different chains doing different things, better and worse. But they all somehow have a construct of stables, right? So like as an average user, no matter how crypto aware I am, having a stable should be like my ticket to ride. I
Yeah.
should be able to get from point A to point B with that stable, and it should be no problem. And so it's a little bit of an adjacent answer to your question, or maybe a tangential one, but I'm just like most things
Yeah.
is the way I feel if you're built on chain. Very, very few things, I think. Even if you want to roll your own payment token or you got like a game token that people need to get to play your thing, you should just be taking stables. And you can get someone into that construct from there. Um, that's that's the way I kind of think about it right now. So my answer to your question is like most things.
Cool. Well, it was great to have you on this episode of Digitized Spotlight. Where can listeners find you and check out Eco?
We're easy to find, actually. We're super easy to find. Eco.com doesn't get simpler. At Eco on Twitter. And then from there, you can find me as well. I'm Ryne Sachs, RYNESAXE on Twitter. Hit me up there. Follow our progress. We got a lot to say.
Thanks for hopping on.
All right. Thank you all for having me. It was fun.
Thanks for joining us as we chat with Ryne. It's been exciting to learn more about Eco's solution for cross-chain stablecoin liquidity and the current state of the stablecoin market.
Agreed. As there's more and more stablecoins that launch on a daily basis and more companies coming on in this category, it's been awesome to dig into all the growth and kind of hear his perspective. Follow us along as we chat with more founders building at the intersection of consumer and crypto. Bye.
Bye.